זורק תרים, קטונתי מצעיר בנייך ומאחרון המשוררים. גשמך צורב את השפתיים כנשיקת זרב, אם אשכחך ירושלים אשר כולה זהב. ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור, הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור. ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור, הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור.
Meet your next.
So let's just note this is not my field of expertise, but note the simple format, note the lack of orchestration, note the lack of pomp and circumstance. I don't know if you can notice in the background, but that was the Knesset that was in the background. I'm not exactly sure where that picture was taken from. I don't know, Sharon, maybe you know. I don't know what angle that was exactly, but the simplicity of that. And we'll note the difference when we play Yerushalayim Zel Zahav, right, to show the status of it as it changed statuses and really became like the new national anthem of Israel. Sharon, before we move on to the text, anything you want to comment on?
Sure. So the idea of Yerushalayim Shel Zahav, the lyrics of the song came from Naomi Shemer, but it was also inspired by the Spanish poet Yehuda Halevi, who I've grown quite intimate with over the past month, at Poets Society. I did a lot of exploration about him, and the words were in Yerushalayim Shel Zahav, where it says, "For all of your songs, I am your lyre, your violin." It shows how strong the tie to Jerusalem was, even going back to medieval times, that there was always a pull to Jerusalem. In fact, he closes this same poem with the very famous expression, Libi b'mizrach v'anochi b'sof ha'ma'arav, my heart is in the east and I'm at the far end of the west. And we see that pull. In fact, Yehuda Halevi was one of the first people to make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem for the sake of going to Jerusalem, because that's where he felt he needed to be. Whether he made it or not, we don't know. The story is he made it up to the gates of Jerusalem before being trampled by a Roman on a horse. But we don't know for sure. There are other stories that say he went back to Spain. But there has always been that strong tie to Jerusalem and that strong desire to be there. So when Naomi Shemer wrote this song, she borrowed from him and she incorporated those not ancient, but those very old words into modern times. And we still use those same expressions. My heart is in the east is actually, I think Rick Recht or Dan Nichols came out with a song called My Heart is in the East, based on Yehuda Halevi. So those timeless words have brought us through the generations. Before we go on to the newest Yerushalayim Shel Zahav, I think it's important to note that there was also sort of a counterbalance in reference to all of the challenges and all of the fighting and all of the heartache and pain associated with Jerusalem. In fact, somebody shared that same song this morning on Facebook, I noticed as well, Rabbi. And I said, oh, right, that. So do you want to talk a little bit about Yerushalayim Shel Barzel?
I think I will. Let's look at the text first. Let's look at a couple of verses. Mm-hmm. Let's look at the verses. Before we do the counter verses, let's look at the real verses.
Let me pull that up and share.
Okay.
Jerusalem of iron.
Can we go to the Jerusalem of gold?
Yes. One moment.
We'll get to Barzell.
It's coming, and here we go.
Great. Okay. The mountain air is clear as wine, and the scent of pines is carried on the breeze of twilight with the sound of bells. And in the slumber of tree and stone, captured in her dream, and here's the key verse, the opening verse, the city that sits solitary, and in its midst is a wall. The city is Jerusalem that sits solitary. What does that evoke? What feeling does that evoke? A city that sits solitary. What's the image?
Lonely.
Lonely? Okay.
That the Jews that were not there or weren't there
Right,
for a long time.
right. And if you know your Bible, in your mind, you hear the book of Lamentations, Eicha Yoshva Badad, how the book of Eicha begins and says that Jerusalem is Badad, is same word, solitary. So it's actually a reference to a biblical verse. And in its midst is a wall. This is particularly resonant today, much more than this was a week ago. And in its midst is a wall. Which wall?
Hotel?
That seems obvious that it's the Kotel. Right in the midst is a wall. It's not what Naomi Shemer had in mind. Do you know of another wall that was in Jerusalem between 1948 and 1967?
Like the Brandenburg Gate, I mean, that between the cities?
Right. There was a wall right in the middle of Jerusalem between East and West Jerusalem. Stone wall with barbed wire, no man's land. And when Naomi Shemer wrote this, according to at least the poet that I studied with, said that it's doubly resonant. You think Kotel, but it's also the wall that divided the city, a city divided. All right, let's skip down a little bit and let's look at the second verse. How the mountains have dried, the marketplace is empty, and no one frequents the Temple Mount in the old city. And in the caves and in the mountains, winds are howling, and no one descends to the Dead Sea by way of Jericho. So Ellen, that goes back to exactly what you said before, right? Lonely, quiet. There are no Jewish residents in Jerusalem. Okay. Let's keep going. Okay. As I come to sing to you today and to adorn crowns to you, I am the smallest. So this is a person talking. I am the smallest. Katonti. I am the smallest of the youngest of your children and of the last poet. So what do you think it means to be katonti, to be small? you're a person in Israel at this time, before Jerusalem is reunited. What's katonti? What's it mean to be small? Or what feeling does that evoke?
There's a certain sense of humility, of awe, of, what people would refer to today as, almost, to me, at least, it evokes imposter syndrome. Like, what am I doing here? I'm not worthy of being here. I'm not good enough to be here. I'm not worthy of this amazing, incredible place.
Terrific. There's some tension between the humility of the person and the grandeur of the place. That's the tension that she is trying to create. And then she kind of responds to that and lets loose with this amazing statement. For your name scorches the lips like the kiss of an angel. Right? That's the power. That's the power of the moment. If I forget thee, Jerusalem, she doesn't finish the biblical verse. Right? How does the verse finish?
I will forget my right hand.
So why does she either consciously not finish the verse or not feel she needs to finish the verse?
Because she'll never forget and continue to try to remember. She won't forget.
Why does she only need a sentence fragment?
She has to compose to the available metrical musical system, for one thing.
Well, that could be. Okay, I'm not that musical. So finish this. If the shoe fits,
Wear it.
wear it. When in Rome,
Do as the Romans do.
if I forget thee, Jerusalem,
I'll forget my right hand.
right? Everybody knows it. You don't need to finish it. That says, boy, is this embedded deeply. I don't need to tell you everything. You know it. And also it's saying, I don't have to finish the sentence. You finish it. How do you want it to finish? What will you write here? What will you say? So now let's look at the last verse, right? So Naomi Shemer wrote the poem before Jerusalem was united, before the war broke out. Then the war broke out. On the third day, Jerusalem is unified. Teddy Kollek, the mayor of Jerusalem, who originally asked Naomi Shemer to write the poem, says, you now have to rewrite this verse. And how does she rewrite the verse? We have returned to the cisterns, to the market and the marketplace. A ram's horn calls out on the Temple Mount in the old city. And in the caves in the mountains, thousands of sunshine, we will once again descend to the Dead Sea by the way of Jericho. So it's an acknowledgement that things have changed. Now let's go back to what Sharon started beautifully and look at the chorus. Jerusalem of gold and of copper and of light, behold, I am a violin for all your songs. So let's talk a little bit about what is a Jerusalem of gold. Any thoughts? What do you know? What's a Jerusalem of gold? Or when you hear that, what do you think of?
I think of the way the light shines on the stone.
right? Do you guys remember the picture that I show as my Zoom background on Friday night? Right, with the sun over Jerusalem, right? You have that, right? It turns out, Sharon, do you want to tell us a little bit about Rabbi Akiva and the crown?
So there was a crown, and I'm gonna stop share so I can get the picture to share with you. There was a crown of Jerusalem that was a very well-known crown that is said to have been worn by all women who would get married in Jerusalem. In fact, it was also said to have been worn by Queen Esther. And we have the image here. And it went away. So bear with me for just one moment.
That gate between the East and West Jerusalem is called the Mandelbaum Gate. I mistakenly said that the name of the gate between East and West Berlin.
Yes. Find the picture. Here we go. So here we see the crown, the Greek goddess crown here. And here, if we look in the back corner here, we see Queen Esther wearing a Yerushalayim Shel Zahav crown on her head. So this was a crown, again, that women had worn to get married in Jerusalem. And so it was very much not just symbolic, but an actual thing that happens.
So we know from the story of Rabbi Akiva that he went away to study and he rewarded his wife by giving her a Yerushalayim Shel Zahav, by way of saying, thank you for letting me study and become a great scholar. I'm going to reward you by showing you this, giving you this absolutely splendid, expensive piece of jewelry called a Yerushalayim Shel Zahav, which they have subsequently found, which they know from other places that actually had the wall that went around Jerusalem on it. So Naomi Shemer was also referencing not only the sunset, but also this symbol, this ancient symbol of the beauty of Jerusalem, Yerushalayim Shel Zahav. Now take a slight detour. As Sharon mentioned, there were those who were originally opposed to the song, saying that it was not a true reflection of reality. The battle for Jerusalem was not so grand and glorious. It killed soldiers and left mothers without their children. So one poet, songwriter named Moshe Arieli wrote a counter poem, a counter song called Yerushalayim Shel Barzel, to sort of speak of the opposite view. So we're going to share that. It was very powerful and very controversial. In the clip that we have, we'll show you his words.
במחשקייך ירושלים מצאנו לב אוהב, אתבנו להרחיב גבולייך ולמגר אויב. מכל מרגמותיו רבינו ושחר קם פתאום, הוא רק עלה עוד לא הלבין הוא וכבר היה אדום. ירושלים של ברזל ושל עופרת ושל שחור, הלא לחומותייך קראנו דרור, ירושלים של ברזל ושל עופרת ושל שחור, הלא לחומותייך קראנו דרור. הגדוד רגום פרץ קדימה, דם ועשן כולו, ובאו אמא אחר אמא בקהל השכולות. נושך שפתיו ולא בלי יגע, הוסיף הגדוד ללחום, עד שסוף סוף הוחלף הדגל מעל בית הנכות. ירושלים של ברזל ושל עופרת ושל שחור, הלא לחומותייך קראנו דרור. ירושלים של ברזל ושל עופרת ושל שחור, הלא לחומותייך קראנו דרור. נפוצו כל גדודי המלך, צלף נדם צריחו, עכשיו אפשר אל ים המלח בדרך יריחו. עכשיו אפשר אל הר הבית וכותל מערב, הנה הנך באור ארבעים כמעט כולך זהב. ירושלים של זהב ושל עופרת וחלום, לעד בין חומותייך ישכון שלום. ירושלים של זהב ושל עופרת וחלום, לעד בין חומותייך ישכון שלום.
Some ways a pretty prophetic song. He wrote it as a protest song and a reality check. What is Jerusalem of iron? What's the iron?
Weapons,
Weapons, the guns, the tanks, the everything
Right.
in the war.
I have to go, but I never heard Yerushalayim Shel Barzel. I'm really happy to have heard that. Thank you.
Bye, Nancy. Thank you.
Thank you for being here, Nancy. We'll talk later.
Okay, great.
I think in it, he's addressing the sacrifices that had to be made for Jerusalem and how serious. And instead of saying, you know, we'll have peace in Jerusalem, he says, will we have peace in Jerusalem? So it's like he could foresee that just because they united Jerusalem, then the war wasn't over. That
Correct.
he could see down in the future. And here we are today in what's going on there now.
Right. Precisely. Precisely. So a few years later, it's not Moshe Arieli, by the way, it's Meir Arieli. Soon after the song was written, a member of Knesset by the name of Uri Aveniri proposed a bill that Jerusalem of Gold become the new national anthem of Israel to replace Hatikva. He had issues with Hatikva, some other people did. And Naomi Shemer was asked about it, and she said, I have no intention of doing so. That was never in my mind. I'm not interested in it. But it is important that he suggested it. It never went very far in Knesset, but it did become a possibility. And I'm remembering back to that year 1968. And when I went to services, they printed out Yerushalayim Shel Zahav and pasted it in the back of the Shabbat prayer book. And we concluded Friday night services, I don't know for how long, by singing instead of Yigdal, Yerushalayim Shel Zahav. I don't know if anybody else ever had that experience. But that's in Queens, that's what we did. Back in Queens. So let me ask you this. Do you think it's a religious song?
At least.
Oh, we lost you, Harriet.
At least a religious song. You can't hear me?
Now we
No,
can.
we
hear you.
can. Yeah.
At least, I say. You can see it many ways. The words that come to my mind are kavod me'od, for both Jerusalem of gold and also of iron. But kavod me'od, it just came to mind. An expression of the ultimate that the city can endure.
I don't see it as a religious song, although I love the song. It's one of my favorites, if not my favorite. But I see it more of the spiritual in the love for Jerusalem and what it means, that city means to us as Jews, but not in the religion. I don't see it in the religious sense. I mean, there's no mention, well, maybe I missed it. Is God in there?
No, good. There's no God in it, correct. Right, so I think it's important to note that Yerushalayim Shel Zahav is part of the beginning of a new song trend in Israel of writing songs on religious subjects that are not religious. We would call it a nationalist perspective, maybe, right? It doesn't mention God. There's nothing about prayer, but it feels very religious. It feels highly spiritual.
Yes.
Right? And if you look at modern Israeli music, they quote a lot of biblical verses now. They write piyutim. Now it's become a thing. But Naomi Shemer was one of the first. Sharon, do you have anything you want to add before we conclude with our starring ending rendition?
I reflect on both songs and how they're both so similar and so different at the same time, because at the very end, there is that uplifting, there is that hope. And as I look at the news, there are times where I reflect back on my childhood and all of the experiences, and you can see different points in history when looking at Jerusalem, when it was Yerushalayim Shel Zahav, and when it was Yerushalayim Shel Barzel, kind of like what we look at now. And I find it fascinating that somebody was able to put pen to paper and come up with these beautiful, stirring words borrowed from over 1,000 years ago.
Just a very quick comment. It reminds me, the Star Spangled Banner in many ways, people don't like as our national anthem because it is a war song. It's about war. And many think it should be America the Beautiful or My Country 'Tis of Thee. And this is kind of the reverse. We've kept here in the United States a war song as our national anthem, where Israel did not. Just something that came to my mind.
It's interesting.
So we're going to conclude with another recording of Yerushalayim Shel Zahav. And I want you to note the difference in style, orchestration, setting, and what its purpose is. Right, Shuli Natan, you see her singing it right after it's written. Now, Sharon, I forgot, who do we have playing this?
Ofra Haza.
Ofra Chaza, really well-known, beautiful Israeli Yemenite songstress, belting it out in a way that creates a very different feeling.
Oh, I need to share screen first, don't I?
And especially important for this week.
אוויר הרים צלול לקיים וריח אורני נישא ברוח ארבעים עם כל פעמונים ובתרדמת אילן בעבר שבויה בחלומה העיר אשר בדד יושבת ובליבה חומה ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור הלא לכל שירייך אני חזרנו אל בורות המים לשוק ולכיכר שופר קורא בהר הבית בעיר העתיקה ובמרות אשר בסלע אלפי שמשות זורחות ושוב נרד לים המלח בדרך יריחו ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור הלא לכל שירייך אך בבואי היום לשיר לך ולך לקשור כתרים קטונתי מצעיר בנייך ומאחרון המשוררים כי שמך צורף את השפתיים כנשיקת זרף אם אשכחך ירושלים אשר כולה
powerful, very different.
To me,
Right.
that was a religious song. Just, I felt like that was the eye of God watching over Jerusalem. And it was also like a history lesson because the costumes look like people in the past. As a matter of fact, I feel like I saw one person in a costume with probably like a crusader, like it was the history of Jerusalem way back.
I gotta rewatch it then. I didn't notice that.
I mean, just looking at the costumes, I could see the Israelites coming into, with Moshe, the crusade. It looked like it was just a lesson in a spiritual lesson in history
Mm.
of the city.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's how I thought it was great.
It was definitely a powerful.
Very powerful.
Thank you for joining us.
Very
We're delighted.
lost in
Thank you,
thought.
Sharon, for everything. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, it was very
Thank you
good.
both for joining us.
And may Jerusalem find peace.
Yeah, let's just
Amen.
pray for peace.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Shalom.
Bye.